Welcome, everyone, to the second virtual San Juan Preservation Trust annual meeting. It is good to have you with us, as much as that is possible with this technology. Let us start this and future annual meetings as we do our Board of Trustee meetings, with the acknowledgement that we reside on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, who have called this place home since time immemorial. And let us honor the inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation. I'm happy to announce that we currently have close to 200 households joining us for this webinar. For us to get a better sense of the number of individuals joining us live today, please take a moment now to answer the poll that I believe Sarah would put up on your screen, telling us the number of people who are watching at your location. Thank you. What a past year this has been since our last meeting. For all of us, to varying degrees, this past year has been one of anxiety, loss, and sadness. For your San Juan Preservation Trust, this has also been a year of great opportunity and accomplishment, thanks to the untiring dedication of trust staff and the outstanding generosity of our donors. It is difficult to express in words how much your contributions of money and time and encouragement have meant to staff and trustees this year. Thank you. Thank you. Once again, a special shout out to my colleagues, your Board of Trustee officers, Vice President Barbara Rosencotter, Treasurer Willie Borner, and Secretary Sarah Hart, who have all graciously agreed to take on the extra effort and responsibility of yet another term as officers to see us through this pandemic. Thanks to you three officers for keeping your Board of Trustees president sane, and to all of our trustees for your dedication to the San Juan Preservation Trust during these trying times. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to the person upon whose shoulders much of the weight of the Trust's trials and tribulations of this past year have fallen. A devoted daughter, spouse, and mother whose dedication to her conservation calling on behalf of all of us has entailed significant personal sacrifice, which humbles those of us who have had the good fortune to experience her calm, competence, and compassion. Your Executive Director, Angela Anderson.
Thank you, Keith, for your kind words and yours and the board's support throughout this year. Friends, I'm so glad to be with you today celebrating the 42 years of the Preservation Trust. It is with joy that I present our accomplishments made possible by you since we last met in July 2020. While the challenges faced this year were unprecedented, so has been our ability to meet those challenges and rise above. You, our community of supporters, partners, and allies, seeded hope through your enduring support. Thank you. In reflecting on the year's accomplishments, I would be remiss not to start off by recognizing my talented, dedicated team and kick off, in not so subtle of a way, one of the themes woven through today's meeting, that of the mighty oak. We've welcomed a few new faces in the past year, recognizing those who've been with the Preservation Trust less than 1 year. Let's just call them our acorns. Kristen Buckley, Director of Philanthropy, Vicki Edwards, Conservation Director, and Tom Tidyman, Director of Operations and Finance. Next, I want to call out our freshly sprouted staff. Those who served the Preservation Trust under 5 years, that category includes me, Ruthie Doherty, Ellis Curator, Sierra O'Connell, Outreach and Development Coordinator, Jill Staton, Development Associate, and Elena and Thyra Thompson, our Vendovi caretakers. Yet one only truly begins to hit one's stride as a sapling. With 5 or more years under their belts, we were fortunate to benefit from the experience of Craig Canine, Director of Communications and Outreach, Rob Roy McGregor, land steward, Tom Pence, our Red Mill Farm caretaker, and Alden Remington, our Waldron caretaker. Now, saplings over time may develop to a fully matured tree. A staff member who has truly grown into her own with the Preservation Trust is Ms. Lori Naylor. Lori, our administrative director, started with the Preservation Trust as a contracted bookkeeper some 14 years ago. For the past 11 years, she has served as an employee, taking on more and more responsibility as the organization grew. A keystone to our success, we are fortunate to have her on our team, at least for a few more months. It is with happiness for her and a twinge of sadness, as her presence will be surely missed, that I share the news that Lori has informed us of our plans to retire at the end of August. Lori, our very own giving tree, we are very grateful for all you have given, your time and no doubt blood, sweat, and tears over the many years. Lastly, counting decades of service between them, we're fortunate to benefit from the members of our team that carry forward vast institutional and experiential land-based knowledge, the old growth among us. With 15 years plus experience, we have Kathleen Foley and Dean Doherty. To my team, thank you for committing your efforts each day to conserving, caring for, and connecting our community with the beauty and diversity of life in these beloved islands. We've advanced each of the 3 C's of our mission this year while strategically integrating a climate lens into our decision-making. Acutely aware of the fragility of our island's ecosystems, we aim to build resilience by supporting and strengthening our island's biodiversity. Now to review our accomplishments, beginning with the first C, conserve. This was a record-setting year for the conservation program. We closed 3 conservation easements on Lopez, the Mud Bay Tree Farm, the Davis Bay West and Davis Bay East, 3 conservation easements on Orcas, the Carver CE, the Turtleback Addition, and the Lummi CE. Plus, we completed the Beaverton Marsh Conservation Easement with 5 additional acres than originally contemplated on San Juan. We partnered with the land bank on 3 of these projects, Beaverton, the addition to Turtleback, and Davis Bay East. These jointly held preserves are not only permanently protected, but will include future opportunities for public access. It doesn't stop there. We acquired fee ownership of 2 priority conservation lands, establishing the Keel Preserve on Orcas, and quite notably, the Reef Island in the Wasp Island group. Given the time constraints, I won't go into the particulars of each project, but detailed descriptions of our protected lands can be found on the SJPT website. In the interest of time, I'll highlight just a few here, starting with the Lummi CE. Acquired at the end of July in 2020, you may recall I shared a sneak peek of this project at our last annual meeting. This is SJPT's first conservation project with the Lummi Nation. It indeed has opened the door to new and expanded conservation partnerships. Conservation values here include the rare seaside juniper, Gary oak trees and its associated coastal prairie habitat, pocket beaches that are a Tier 1 protection area for forage fish spawning, and the only known population of fenced lizards in the county. All this was made possible by a far-sighted lover of the islands, Malcolm Goodfellow, who gifted the funds needed to acquire this property, as well as the Turtleback Addition and Reef Island. Moving over to Beaverton Marsh on San Juan Island. What's special about Beaverton, you ask? It's one of the only 2 Class 1 wetlands in the county, and the largest at that. It's home to an array of species, and our shared vision with the help of the land bank includes developing a trail system to connect Lindy Park to the expansive natural area. A special thanks go out to 168 donors who joined forces to provide funds needed to conserve this land. Next, we'll move over to Lopez and Richardson Marsh. Richardson's Marsh is another Class 1 wetlands in San Juan County. It spans 80 acres across 6 parcels. Its ecological, scenic, and open space values are among the most unique in the islands. With these 2 additional conservation easements in place, Davis Bay West and Davis Bay East, totaling 59 acres, we're making huge strides in the permanent protection of the entire marsh. Contributions from the Hodemaker family and a generous anonymous donor enabled the latest expansion of this protected land. And finally, we're going to move back over to Orcas with the most recent addition of the Keel Preserve. The Keel Preserve is adjacent to Moran State Park and a land bank protected property. This 42-acre parcel of wild land features a waterfall, wetlands, and breathtaking old growth forest. Our plan is to provide connectivity to the preserve via Moran's trail system. We're currently working on a management plan and we'll be breaking ground on a trail to the waterfall in the coming year. A total of 18 donors came together to protect this property. I want to thank all our donors and supporters for making this work a reality. We'll move on now to give a special thanks to our conservation easement donors. As we've done in the past, and as is our tradition, we're offering a gift of a Gary oak sapling, the actual plant, not a staff member, for you to plant in your chosen location, or we can plant one in your behalf on an SJPT protected property. So thank you to our conservation easement donors. We'll move on now to the next component of our mission, accomplishments this year in the care, in the second component, the care component. And we start with the trees. Tree planting has been a big effort this year. Over 100 native species were planted at Ellis, Sunstrom, and Phelps preserves, socially distanced, of course, in the past year. Elsewhere, we caged trees so they could grow above canopy height. Not only do these trees increase the biodiversity of our preserves, but as they mature, they will sequester carbon. One of the many ways our work addresses climate change by providing natural climate solutions. Another stewardship highlight of the past year is the completion of the 1.7-mile loop trail at the Marilyn and Fred Ellis Preserve on Shaw Island. Dubbed the Sylvan Trail, it meanders through old growth forests and boasts views of the Thrall Pond and insides of Park Bay. A virtual tour is even available on our website. And now on over to Turtleback. Quite a lot of work continues to happen. The work in the oak woodlands has accelerated this year, with the land bank leading the way in creating deer exclosures and restoring the oak understory. This is the work of many hands, including the Washington Conservation Corps, Civilian Conservation Corps, and numerous volunteers. We'll now move to highlights of the year in our final C, the connect component of our mission. Over the past year, the Preservation Trust has invested in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion training for our staff and board, and formed a working group tasked with providing a structured plan to ensure the values of equity and inclusion permeate our work. We admittedly are at the beginning of our Jedi journey. We are learning along the way, focusing first on training and internal education. We understand that to better carry out our C's of our mission, We have to look at how we work, continuing to strive to improve the workplace culture of inclusivity through equitable organizational policies and practices that translate into all staff feeling valued no matter their position, engaging in relational and reciprocal, not just transactional approaches to our work externally as well. We're looking at where we work, dismantling the barriers of equitable access and promoting a spirit of inclusivity in our events and programs. And we're looking at with whom we work, being open and listening to all voices within the community, noting our work benefits from the rich perspectives from a diversity of people from all walks of life. This work is ongoing, and I'm proud of the members of the board and staff as we each work through this work, opening our minds and hearts to new perspectives and the experiences of others. Next, I'll highlight the pivots we've grown accustomed to making. If anything I can say is that our outreach team is adaptable. We started 2020 with a bold outreach plan. Communications and outreach and stewardship staff came up with a full schedule of work parties and guided preserve tours, our biggest, most ambitious outreach schedule ever. Like so many other plans, the schedule went out the window in March of 2020. So our outreach team decided to try video in an effort to stay connected with our members and our community beyond. You'll experience some of our newly honed films later today in today's presentation. Our first Just a Minute video went up on YouTube in March of 2020. Through the spring and summer, our staff made 27 of them, and then created 10 additional slightly longer Just a Moment videos. These videos have proven quite popular. As you can see, we started the year with a few YouTube channel views, less than 20 in January of 2020. And in September, that number soared to 2,200 views, totaling 190 hours of viewing time. We can't call ourselves YouTube influencers quite yet, but we're headed in the right direction. On to our outreach with schools. Another Connect goal we made progress on in the past year, in spite of the pandemic, is to make some of our preserves available as learning landscapes through partnerships with schools. We entered into preserve access use agreements with the Little House in the Forest School, an outreach preschool on San Juan Island in February 2020, to extend their learning landscape to designated areas of our Eureka Preserve, which is within toddler walking distance of the school's home base. This past April, we completed an access and use agreement with Shaw Island School to extend their learning landscape to the nearby Marilyn and Fred Ellis Preserve. Ruthie Doherty, our Ellis Preserve curator, introduced Shaw School students to the cultural and natural history of the preserve earlier this month, and they expressed their gratitude in very creative ways. And with that, we have a lot of gratitude in our hearts as well. We owe a debt of gratitude for volunteers who help us each and every day. This year, the number of volunteers and the number of hours went up significantly, more than double from the same time last year. On behalf of the board and staff, I share our heartfelt thank you to all our devoted volunteers. Among this notable group is a volunteer whose dedication and efforts truly stood out. Since last fall, Troy Buckley accrued over 173 hours as preserve steward of Turtleback, Turtlehead, and Reef Island preserves, as well as helping wherever he could and wherever was needed most. Here's a short clip honoring our 2021 Volunteer of the Year, Troy Buckley.
Thanks for joining us today, Troy.
I'm very glad to be here. Any excuse I have to get out into this beautiful landscape.
Yeah, and speaking of beautiful landscape, I see a lot of new Gary oaks and native flowers that were recently planted here. And I know you've been involved with this project and several more. How many tree saplings and plant plugs do you say you've put in the ground this spring?
Personally, I've planted dozens and dozens of them, but I've worked together with many different volunteers, and there have been hundreds planted in the course of the previous year. Um, it's a great milestone in rehabilitating the habitat, but it really takes a lot more work. It takes a lot longer, a much more arduous process to prepare the grounds to receive these native species.
That's true. But it's all worth it sometimes when you think about these oaks that will mature and live on with the next generation. How does that make you feel?
I feel very honored to be part of a community that invests so much time and effort into preserving and improving the natural habitat. The Gary Oaks are going to live for centuries, and that's going to improve the lives and the biodiversity in this area for centuries to come. And I can't say that about a lot of things I've worked on in my life.
Yeah, me either. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey and how ultimately you decided to get involved with the work of the Preservation Trust and the Land Bank?
I've always felt a strong connection with the environment, and in 2014, my wife and I bought a house here on Orcas Island. We received a nice welcoming note from Tim Seifert.
Oh yeah, Tim was our former executive director, right?
That's right, yes. So he introduced us to the Preservation Trust, and we became occasional volunteers. But we did escape the city and have moved up here full time. And now we're able to invest a lot more of our time and energy into participating in great rehabilitation projects like this.
Well, that's awesome. And that's what the Connect mission is all about. And you've distinguished yourself. And that's saying a lot because I meet with and work with a lot of talented, creative, and environmentally conscious members of our community.
It really has been a lot of fun getting to meet so many great people through my volunteering efforts. I've met some great volunteers that have just boundless energy. Enjoyed working with the staff of the Preservation Trust and the Land Bank. Mm-hmm. And I've met some great visitors here to the preserves as well. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. And you have stood out with your consistent care of the preserves that you've adopted. You tackle noxious weeds, making room for native plantings. You manage and maintain top-notch trail systems. And you're consistently picking up garbage, even orange peels that don't degrade very fast, because this is a Leave No Trace county after all. So because of these things and more, the SJPT staff has decided to honor you with this year's Volunteer of the Year award. And as a gesture of our appreciation, we'd like to gift you this. This is actually a hori-hori. It's not quite a saber, but close. And it won't only look cool on your belt, but it'll help you to enhance the biodiversity here on these protected lands.
Well, thank you so much. This will really make getting rid of all the noxious weeds much easier. Thank you so much.
Yes, well, thank you, Troy. We really appreciate you. And speaking of noxious weeds, I've seen a few on our way out here, so why don't you get to work?
I guess I've got to get busy.
Thank you, Troy, and congratulations. As fabulous as Troy is, I now have the honor to pass the mic to his gracious and talented other half, who, by the way, had no part in the Volunteer of the Year selection. Please welcome Kristen Buckley, our new Director of Philanthropy.
Hi, everyone. In addition to the donors that Angela mentioned in her updates, there are hundreds more. People like you, people committed to our islands and to their protection, people whose generosity fuels our work. We are grateful for your partnership and all that it allows us to accomplish. I'd like to highlight a couple of very special groups this evening. The first is a group of people from whom we've received estate gifts in the past year. They made plans during their lifetime to protect and care for the San Juan Islands after their passing. We are most grateful. Additionally, I'd like to highlight the GAN Society. These folks are people who made plans today to make gifts in the future through their estates. Look at the names that are just starting to scroll on your screen. Can you imagine the impact that all of these future gifts are going to have on the San Juan Islands? I can, and it's amazing. The GAN Society typically would gather throughout the year, but of course, this past year, we were stuck with the pandemic restrictions that affected all of us. I look forward to future gatherings of the GAN Society and even beyond the GAN Society for having a chance to meet with more and more of you face to face, to have a chance to know you, to hear your stories of connection to the San Juan Preservation Trust, and to be able to thank you in person. As we finish looking at the GAN Society list and imagining the impact of their future support, I will introduce Nancy Green, who is the chair of our Nominating and Governance Committee, and she's going to give us an update about the Board of Trustees. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Green. I'm Lopez Island trustee and chair of the Nominating and Governance Committee. First, I would like to thank everyone associated with the trust for their continued support during this pandemic. We have a hardworking board and staff that have really stepped up this past year, proving how strong we really are. Our committee is charged with putting forth a slate of trustee candidates for your consideration. The ballot was mailed to members prior to this meeting, and I would like to inform you that the ballots have been counted and that the results were unanimous, with 5 incumbent trustees who successfully stood for re-election to new terms. These include Tom Cowan, who is a trustee at large, Jeff Dunbar, representing San Juan Island, Jack Groban, representing Orcas Island, and John Wetton and Judy Meyer, representing Lopez Island. Congratulations to you all. Every individual that makes up the trust family contributes to making a difference. 10 days ago, we were shocked and deeply saddened to learn of the passing of one of our trustees, Martha Fuller, on May 5th. Martha joined the board in February 2019, and in that brief time, she was remarkable. Martha grew up in Northwest Indiana and graduated from Drake University in Iowa, and soon found herself working in a variety of locations in the financial realm. Starting as an auditor with Arthur Andersen, her experience grew and ranged from her work in government as Director of Finance and Director of Planning and Economic Development in St. Paul, Minnesota, to being Chief Financial Officer for a number of sports teams, including the Seattle Seahawks and the Seattle Sounders, as well as part of the financial team at Vulcan, Paul Allen's holding company. Martha mentored young women and was an advocate for empowerment of women through sports. In 2006, Martha and her husband Tim purchased a house on Orcas where they came for weekends and holidays until 2014 when they became full-time residents. As a resident, she immersed herself in the Orcas community and built strong ties. At the Lower Tavern, where she served in a variety of positions, people were drawn to her sunny personality and enthusiasm for sports. She deeply believed in community service. In addition to her involvement with the trust, Martha served on the boards of the Orcas Island Community Foundation, the Orcas Public Library, and as a member of the East Sound Planning Committee. She also served on the Opal Community Land Trust Working Group that developed a community loan fund for people seeking affordable housing on Orcas Island. As a board member with the trust, Martha stepped right up, joining our Connect and financial committees. She believed in the Connect Committee's mission to develop better ties between the trust and all segments of our island communities. As such, she helped develop our advocacy policy and then took on the task of communicating the importance of conservation with government officials on all levels. Even when her health was failing, her husband Tim wrote shortly after her death, Martha tried to contribute to the Preservation Trust mission in any way she could because she believed so much in it. In the last week, she continued to write letters on our behalf. When she passed at their winter home in La Paz, Mexico, her husband Tim was by her side. He reflected that she was strong, courageous, kind, witty, and funny until the end. In lieu of flowers, the family has requested donations to the charities she served. Should you wish to honor Martha, the trust has set up a web page about Martha and a link for donations. And now I'd like to introduce Willie Borner from Shaw Island, Chair of the Finance Committee, to say a few more words regarding Martha.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. We are very saddened that we lost Martha as a very valuable member of the Finance Committee, even with her immense knowledge. Excuse me. Even with her immense knowledge and experience in financial management, she was ever so quiet. But we spoke. Her words carried weight. She was a wonderful colleague on our team. Farewell, Martha. We miss you. Now, I'm going to present you the financial results for the past year, 2020. And as a comparison, also the results from 2019. The numbers you are seeing on these slides are in thousands. I have to point out to you that the 2020 results are not yet audited. That typically happens in August. Let's look at the abbreviated statement of financial positions on your left. The cash and cash equivalents have increased by about 2.2 million to 6 million. That means we have a good liquid reserve on hand. The investment assets did increase by 1.7 million. So the total capital investment accounts, which are long-term investments, amount to over $13 million. The conservation lands have increased by about 4 million. That is due to the exceptional gift from Malcolm Goodfellow for the purpose of acquiring Reef Island. Again, historically, the Preservation Trust does not have any long-term debt. That's why it shows $0. Now let's look at the abbreviated summary of activities for 2020 and the previous year, 2019, on your right. The general contributions, grants, and other gifts increased by close to 1 million to a total of 1.7 million. That is mainly thanks to all of you for making these wonderful donations from year to year. On the other hand, the bequests have decreased by about $850,000 to $700,000. Bequests, due to its nature, can never be planned for. Therefore, we typically see these kind of differences going up or down from year to year. The same goes for gifts of land. This line item shows gifts of land of $370,000 versus $841,000 the year before. However, that is deceiving, as you will see below under restricted contributions, etc. The income on investments was about $1.6 million. That is an investment return of over 12%. I remind you, though, that the investment philosophy we take is long-term. So these kind of returns are not guaranteed and will change in the future. Now we come to the restricted contributions for land acquisitions, stewardship, endowment, and others. That sum is 10.7 million. That very large sum is unique for this year and again reflects the large and very generous gift received from our major donor that year and the numerous designated donations from our members like you. That rather large and unusual sum enabled us to do the land transactions for the Turtleback Addition, Hyder Point, and Reef Islands, as Angela reported earlier. Let's look at the expense side. Nothing out of the ordinary there. It is very similar to the prior year and years before. We have done some conservation easement acquisitions in 2020 in the order of $406,000 as compared to none the previous year. Then you notice the sum of just over 5 million for gifts of land. That again has to do with the land acquisitions. I need to point out to you that in general, due to COVID, we have had operating expenses which were quite below budget. That meant no travel, no in-person charity events, and we delayed the filling of open positions until later last and earlier this year. The Preservation Trust is growing with all its new and increased programs. Therefore, the 2021 budget is going to be larger, is larger. Let's look at the pie charts to give you a more graphic picture of the income and expenses and their allocations. On the left, you have the pie chart for the income, and on the bottom, you see the expense allocations. Looking at these, it becomes clear that this is not a normal year for both income and expenses. Again, due to the large gifts and land transactions I just mentioned before. Both in income and expenses, they take up very large parts of the pie. For demonstration purposes only, you'll see a pie chart on the right showing the expense allocations without the land transactions. That chart begins to look a little more like a chart in a more typical year, whereas the stewardship expenses, for example, represent almost half of the total operating expenses, and all others show a roughly equal allocation between 12 and 17% each on that pie chart as well. Again, this is for demonstration purposes only, and you can assume that land acquisitions would be more typical in the $1 to $2 million area from year to year, unless another large opportunity presents itself. As always, you can see the more detailed financial reports on our website once it's audited. So that is the financial picture for the year 2020. I'm proud to say that the Preservation Trust stands here today in a very solid and healthy financial position. They can only continue with your very valued and appreciated donations now and into the future. Thank you all very much for your participation and your continued support. Last but not least, I want to thank Lori Naylor for making my job easier. It has always been a pleasure to work with Lori on all the financial issues, and her hard work and diligence has never failed. Thank you very much, Lori. And now, let me hand off to Michael Parkney, our chair of the Connect Committee. Thank you all.
Good evening, all. Thanks very much for joining us. I have the pleasure of introducing to you our Climate Leadership Scholars for 2021. Recognizing that climate change is already altering the islands and waters that the Preservation Trust protects. Our Board of Trustees decided last year to establish a Climate Leadership Scholarship Program for seniors graduating from island high schools or doing a homeschooled alternative. The scholarships are intended to recognize and encourage young members of our island communities who are leading the way toward a more hopeful climate future. Individual board members personally funded 2 $5,000 college scholarships, doubling last year's awards. Out of an impressive field of applicants, the scholarship committee chose 2 awardees, Isla Radwin from Friday Harbor High School, who will be attending Stanford University this fall, and Isabella Izzy Janazek from Orcas Island High School, who will be attending the Honors College at Washington State University. Here is a short video so that they can share their thoughts with you tonight.
Izzy Janacek and
Isla Ridwan.
I'm super excited. It's amazing to win a scholarship that coincides so well with my passions, and I'm just really grateful to receive this award.
I am feeling great, and I'm very grateful to have received this scholarship. The scholarship really means something to me because it's about climate and climate leadership, and it feels really great to be recognized for that because it's been such a big part of my life.
I don't think specifically where I'm going to college was much affected by my concern about climate, but I think what I want to do with my college degree definitely is, right now I'm really interested in going into environmental policy, and I think that's definitely not something I would ever consider unless I was concerned about climate change.
So it definitely has affected my future plans. I have always just wanted to help people, and for the longest time that was through medicine, but recently I've gotten really interested in the intersection between human health and the health of the environment. And then also working with Friends of the San Juans for the past 4 years. They took us to Olympia, and just walking through the halls of the Capitol building, I really could picture myself working in a place like that, working on climate policy and environmental policy. As far as college, I will be going to Stanford University, where I will have the ability to study medicine and climate change and environmental studies. I'll be able to really study whatever I want to, and I have the time to really find what my real passions are regarding climate change.
Definitely my parents. I guess that's a pretty basic answer, but they definitely have fostered my love for being outside since I was really young, and I really appreciate that.
Definitely my parents. Both of them are just such hard workers, and my mom is really the one who originally got me really passionate about climate change and the environment.
I think because climate change is such a pressing issue for our generation, it's caused a lot of young leaders to come up all over the world, and that's really inspirational to me. And I think just the general awareness of climate change as an issue among people my age is really something that gives me hope for the future.
Well, climate change is definitely kind of an overwhelming topic, and it can feel really heavy, but the things that give me hope are really just seeing all of the youth around the world who are fighting so hard for this. And also on a more local level, just with organizing climate strikes and marches, just seeing that there are so many people that show up to those because they are also passionate about it and want to do something about it. That fills me with hope.
Isla and Izzy, we at the Trust and all of our members are wishing you both a wonderful college career. And now back to our Executive Director, Angela.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so excited to share our feature presentation, What's So Great About the Gary Oak. I had the chance to be in the wings as Sierra, Craig, and another amazing volunteer, Michael Noonan, filmed the segment on Vendovi. It was truly an inspiring day. In fact, a birthday treat. I had taken the day off to celebrate my birthday on Vendovi with my father and young daughter. This was my father's first time to the islands in over 2 years due to COVID, and his first time ever at an outer island SJPT preserve. To my delight, we were greeted by more family, Sam Barr and his wife, Erin, their daughter, Celie, and as well as Erin's mother, Gretchen, whose birthday it happened to be as well, were joining the production. To experience Vendovi Island with 3 generations of my family, as well as that of our featured guest, Sam, is a memory I'll hold on to for a lifetime. Sitting at Paintbrush Point, hearing our girls' laughter intermingled with his ancient song, I was struck by the profound connection of our work to supporting the preservation of cultural practices and the passing of traditions from one generation to the next. We hope you will enjoy this brief introduction to the world of Gary Oaks. We set aside a short time at the end of the video to ask questions of our illustrious in-house experts, Dean and Kathleen. Please feel free to write in questions via the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. As time allows, Sierra will be posing questions to our panel directly after the video. And now for our featured presentation, What's So Great About the Gary Oaks?
Hi, I'm Craig Canine from the San Juan Preservation Trust, and here I'm holding a couple of oak leaves that fell sometime last fall from this majestic oak tree behind me. You know, oaks are one of the most noble and revered trees on earth, symbols of steadfast strength and endurance. Here in the San Juan Islands, we have our own adapted oak species. It's called Quercus garryana, also known as the Gary oak. You know, in our conservation work at the Preservation Trust, we talk a lot about Gary oaks. Our volunteers plant hundreds of them every year, and we give them as special gifts, saplings, to some of our most farsighted donors. But you know, I'll let you in on a little secret. Sometimes I wonder, what's the big deal about Gary oaks? Why are they so important? Come along with me on a journey to find out.
Nostalgia, Jochs Emerson, Chogongongelasum, Uchitzen, das Echen, Hartga, das Berchen.
Hi, Sam.
Hello, Craig. How are you?
It's amazing to see you on Vendovia Island on this beautiful spring day. I have to tell you, my spine is tingling hearing that song and those words you were just saying. Can you tell me what you were singing and talking about, please?
Yeah, I sing that song before I harvest plant medicines and foods such as camas. And the prayer that I said was in the Lekwungen and Samish language. And essentially is what I said was that this here is a prairie, spachen, that's the word for prairie, spachen. And that this used to be a place where our people, our Huilngoch people, would come to gather food and medicine that we would be able to feed ourselves all year long with. And it's actually a living remnant of a garden that was very thoughtfully stewarded by the old ones, by the ancestors for thousands and thousands of years.
So this type of coastal meadow is typical of the Gary oak meadow complex. Is that right?
That's exactly right. There's a few plants that grow together really, really nicely in these prairies, and they all happen to be fire-adapted species as well. And so the management technique that people would use to manage these prairies would actually promote a few key species that people really, really relied on for their winter food sources. Camas, which we call quishal, and the chocolate lily, alik, and then the Gary oak, which is jungilch. And the Gary oak is a really special tree because it's one of the few that would be able to survive these prairie burns that people would do. And it was valued for the acorns. There's a special way to process them, which is pretty labor intensive. But the wood is also such an extremely hard, dense wood that people would use that wood to make tools with, specifically the D adze, which is a carving tool shaped like a uppercase D. That would be the handle that you would then attach a piece of nephrite stone that had been shaped into a blade. And the name jungilch for the Gary oak tree actually translates into D adze tree. So it was really special for that reason.
Named after the tool that was used to. Wow, I've learned so much. Thanks, Sam. How do you say "see you later" in Quamish?
Haikwicha.
Haikwicha.
That's perfect. Yep.
All right.
And then to say back, I say hayok.
Thanks, Sam. I'm sorry to interrupt this intimate moment, Kathleen, but why are you hugging this tree?
Hey, Craig. Well, you kind of caught me in an awkward moment here. Yeah, having a little love fest with one of my favorite trees. This is an Oregon white oak, otherwise known as Gary oak, and I guess I'm hugging it because it's so rare and precious. It's basically considered a keystone species. It's sort of the linchpin in a whole ecosystem. There's not very many of these trees on the landscape, but they have kind of an outsized presence relative to their abundance. There's actually hundreds of plants and animals that associate with these trees and their ecosystems that you don't find elsewhere in, conifer forests or riparian areas.
So tell me about why this is the keystone for so many species. Why do they depend on this tree?
Well, a lot of it's just about structure. As these trees age and the bark gets more furrowed, all of these little cracks can provide roosting habitat for bats. There's actually 9 different species of bats here in the islands that you could find in oak habitat. There's small lizards that will nest in there. Of course, birds will use some of these crevices for storing food. The cavities, these natural cavities that appear as these trees age, this one's getting really old and quite decadent. So limbs are starting to fall off. And when that happens, it creates these natural cavities, which are perfect for cavity nesting species, such as the western bluebird.
What happened once the European American settlers came onto the scene?
Yeah, there was a lot of different things that really created the loss of the oak habitat. One was clearing a lot of the areas where these oaks grew historically, maybe where they were growing in deeper soils, good agricultural soils, and so those areas were cleared for agricultural purposes. Obviously also for housing, and so habitat alteration has been a big factor. In addition to that, the settlers were afraid of fire, and these are trees that adapted in fire regimes. They've got this beautiful thick bark that protected them from the low intensity ground fires that the native peoples would light. And they're very slow growing, and so when the fires stopped, conifers like Douglas fir, which are much quicker growing, were able to flourish, and they grow a lot faster than the oak trees. And so over time, they would basically shade out the oak trees, and the crowns of the oaks would die back. They wouldn't produce as much acorns, and so they just weren't able to regenerate like they used to.
Well, thanks, Kathleen. I feel like I understand a little better now why these trees are so central to the work of the Preservation Trust. I'm going to leave you back to your little intimate moment with the tree. Hi, Tom.
Oh, hi, Craig.
So, is that a Gary oak that you're planting here?
It is.
That is a tiny little tree. Are you telling me that is going to grow up to be a big oak like that one up there?
If conditions are right, it will absolutely grow up to be just like that tree up there.
Huh. So why are you planting a Gary oak here in this particular spot?
Well, one of the things we've been trying to do for the last 10 years is to try to restore this area to the habitat featuring the Gary oak that it used to be. It got taken over by a lot of the conifers out here, and we've since been rolling back the conifers to try to expose more ground for Gary oaks to grow, for the herbaceous plants to grow that are part of the Gary oak system.
So Tom, you've been a forester for all of your career. You've been with the U.S. Forest Service for what, something like 30 years, from Kentucky to Oregon and all the way up to Alaska, and now here in Washington State. So I'm just wondering, from that perspective, how would you rate this Gary oak ecosystem?
It's a really rare habitat, and it's one that over time has gotten decimated for any number of reasons, from development to invasive plants to no more fire being used out here. to actually establish this. So yeah, to have this restored makes great sense. It should be what we're doing.
Wow. So I'm just looking at this specimen that you got here, and so the tree part itself is like just a few inches tall, but this is a long container. What's up with that?
Yeah, this is a characteristic of Gary oaks. It's really important for its survival. It grows a really long taproot as part of its initial growth. And the top of the plant outside of the soil could be very small. It may only be a few inches high for 3 to 7 years. And it spends all that time investing in the roots, especially that taproot. And we have to just be patient with these things and let them grow in their time. Because all of a sudden, 1 year, they'll just start growing. From this little small stage, they'll start growing maybe 1 foot to 2 feet a year.
So you've got it in the ground, and now what?
So next what we do is we're protecting against voles and against deer. And we need something to actually cover over the seedling, not just above ground, but actually below ground, because the voles can girdle a tree underneath the ground.
So I take it it's translucent enough so sun can get through.
That's exactly right. This actually acts as a little greenhouse.
Ah.
And it allows the plant to grow really well inside there. You just put a stiffener along the side so it's not going to blow over, and now you've got it protected.
Well, Tom, I've learned a lot today about how you plant oaks, why you are storing them, and thanks for telling me about the gospel of the Gary oak.
You're welcome.
All right, see you later.
Bye now.
Hey, Dean.
Hey, Craig. Welcome to Turtleback Mountain.
Why, thank you. What are you up to here?
I was just looking at one of the lichen species on this tree. This is a Usnea lichen. And, you know, as these trees mature, they become habitat for all sorts of interesting things, not only these lichens, but a bunch of different types of mosses.
Wow, well, I'm just loving this view of Turtleback, and you can tell from the moss, I guess, and the lichen that there's a whole bunch of Gary oaks lined up into the distance towards the rest of Turtleback. So Dean, as the head of stewardship for the Preservation Trust, what are your concerns about caring for this habitat now and into the future?
Well, that's a great question, because I don't know if you know this, but the oaks in the San Juan Islands and in southern Vancouver Island, they're an isolated little population. The nearest oaks are more than 100 miles away. Wow. And they're also at the northern range of oaks. But if the climate changes so that it's more advantageous to oak habitat, we need this population in order to expand into the new areas.
So you're telling me that in some ways at least, a warming climate might actually be beneficial to this kind of habitat?
Absolutely. You know, oak trees are adapted to drier, warmer climates. And as this area gets drier and warmer, there's going to be more places like, you know, the southern facing slope of Turtleback Mountain, which is pretty drought tolerant now. And that's what we're trying to protect here.
Dean, thanks so much for helping me on this journey to learn more about the Gary oak. It's a fascinating tree, but more importantly, it's a precious part of our island ecosystem that we really want to preserve. So I'll leave you now to your lichen, and
okay.
See you later.
Thanks, Greg. We'll see you.
Yep. Well, I've learned a lot on this journey. One thing it's helped me to realize is how these magnificent fellow beings, many of them hundreds of years old, connect the Coast Salish people's ancestral past to us here today. And with your support, we can continue to carry this connection forward, restoring and protecting magnificent Gary oak ecosystems far into the future. Thank you.
Way to bring it home, Craig. Well, I thought that everybody did such a great job. I hope you all enjoyed that presentation. So we have Kathleen and Dean here as our panelists to answer any questions any of you might have on this topic. So go ahead and open your Q&A box. It's found at the very bottom of your screen.
Hi, I'm Craig from the San Juan.
And please type in any questions, and I'll read them out loud for both Kathleen and Dean. So while we're waiting, I guess I have one myself. Who the heck is Gary anyways?
Well, Sierra, this is Dean. So Gary was, he was a guy who worked for the Hudson Bay Company. And the real honor of naming Douglas oaks goes to David Douglas. So he was, of course, Douglas fir tree and Douglas squirrel. He was the botanist who actually described them. And I guess he just wanted to score points with his boss maybe. And so he named it after this guy named Gary.
Huh, that's awesome. I wish I knew David Douglas. And so does Craig. Okay, we have a few more questions rolling in. Are Gary oaks found on most of the islands here in the San Juans?
Not on all of them. Surprisingly, there's very few on Lopez, even though there's quite similar habitat. But they're found on a lot of the small outer islands where they've been able to sort of have a toehold in some of those rocky bluff shoreline areas where other tree species, just because they don't have the big taproot, they can't survive.
Okay, thanks. Another great question is, what type of animals are associated with Gary oaks? By Coleman.
Dean, you want me to take this one?
Go ahead. I think you know more about this one than I do.
Okay. Well, actually, there's a huge variety of insects. Basically, over 800 different insects that are associated with oak and their associated ecosystems. And some 40 of those are considered oak obligates, meaning you won't find them on anything else but oaks. There's over 100 different birds, over 30 different kinds of mammals, I think 7 different reptiles, and amphibians as well. So yeah, when we were talking in the video about it being a keystone species, that really, I think, is very, really demonstrates, with the amount of biodiversity that's associated just with these trees and their associated understory.
Awesome. Okay, there's so many good questions. About how old is that oak tree that you were hugging, Kathleen? Do you know?
I wish I could tell you. The one thing about these trees is they can be challenging to age. Of course, they're growing in really, around the islands they're growing in pretty marginal environments, as opposed to some of the oaks that you see growing down in the prairie soils in lower Puget Sound Basin and down through the Willamette Valley, and so it's hard to age them just kind of going by girth alone, because even small diameter trees could be quite old.
Thanks. So what is the best time of year to plant small Gary oaks, and do they need to be watered during the first few summer seasons?
Well, it's always better to plant trees during the winter. It gives them a chance to get their roots started. Even though they are drought tolerant, any small tree is going to be stressed out if it doesn't get a little bit of a babying the first few years. Giving it a heavy layer of mulch is a great idea because that holds the moisture into the soil. You saw Tom doing that in the video.
Nice. Okay, so this is the combination of a couple squirrel questions. First of all, is it true that flying squirrels on San Juan Island disperse acorns? And then another question is, how would oak trees spread in the future with warming conditions if there are no squirrels here to move acorns around?
Well, oaks spread vegetatively a little bit too. They do throw up new shoots from their root systems. So they do rely on acorns being spread. The good news on Orchis is that you have Stellar's jays, which are likely disperser for those acorns. I don't know the answer to the question about flying squirrels dispersing them.
All right, so one from Janet. I have just fenced an area with camas, fritillarias, and pond lilies and mossy rocks. Might this be a good place for a Gary oak?
Sounds like a great one. I mean, if those species are surviving there, it's probably the right habitat.
Yes. Okay, I'm just gonna ask a few more with the few minutes of time we have left. How vulnerable are mature Gary oaks to losing big limbs to wind damage?
Well, it's hard to say exactly, but if they've gotten to be a big oak, they've survived a lot of windstorms in order to get there. And so they've strengthened over their entire lifetime. So they're not particularly vulnerable until they get really, really old and they just start falling apart.
American Camp has a Gary oak grove along the east cliffs of Eagle Cove, but not many elsewhere. So what's the difference from the English Camp abundance of Garys just a few miles north? I would say maybe deeper soils.
Yeah, and I would also say that is just a harsh environment that those oaks are struggling on down there. I know I'm familiar with that little grove, and I'm always so surprised to see it. But it's just so hammered by the wind and the salt air and everything that it's not surprising that they're just kind of not really thriving in that location. It's up at English Camp, it's a much more protected area, and they're not as subject to the harsh sea air and winds.
So we have first they gave accolades. They said, what a great presentation from Pamela. We're very fortunate to have Gary oak on our property on Orcas Island. So with the change in climate, will it be getting enough water? And what other steps could we take to help support this majestic tree? It currently has both south and west facing exposure.
Well, we have no idea about, whether or not it'll be getting enough water. It's not really clear what's going to happen here in this microclimate. So that's hard to say. But I guess the thing that you could do is just make sure that it doesn't have competition that it didn't grow up with. And so, if as was mentioned in the video, if you've got the Douglas fir trees that are starting to overtop it and that are crowding out its crown, those could be threatening its health. And so the best thing you could do is to support its normal environment.
Well, that's about all we have time for today. So thank you, panelists, and thank you, everybody, for all of your thoughtful questions. I really do hope we can continue to have these conversations about the mighty Gary oak as we maybe even plant some on our protected lands here in the future. So now I'd like to send you all back to Keith for some of his closing remarks.
Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, panelists, and thank you all for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this annual event. Attendees will soon receive an email with a link to the recording of today's meeting. In addition, you will receive a survey from us. We would very much appreciate your comments and suggestions so that we can improve upon and continue to provide the most engaging experiences possible for our members. Be safe, be healthy. This 2021 San Juan Preservation Trust annual meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.